Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When we moved into our dream home in sunny Arizona, we expected peace. What we got was a war. It started with a rocking chair fine and ended with FBI raids, corporate takedowns, and a battle to keep our house from being erased off the map. This is how we fought back. When we moved into our house in Arizona, it felt like turning the page to a quieter, more deliberate chapter of life. After 2 decades in Chicago, sirens, snowdrifts, shouting matches over parking spots, I'd been ready to trade steel and asphalt for stucco and sun. The neighborhood we chose looked like something out of a real estate brochure. Clean sidewalks, citrus trees, tidy driveways with little American flags fluttering just enough to seem like an ad campaign for community values. At first, it was fine. Uneventful. That was the point. I could barbecue without listening to traffic, work in the garage with the door open, and not worry about someone breaking in and making off with my socket set. My wife, Laura, settled into her new job as an administrator at the local high school, and our kids adjusted fast. The HOA was a presence, sure, but a background one. Dues were manageable, rules were fine, and nobody bothered us. That changed, violently, the day Karen Hughes became president of the HOA. I remember the exact morning we got the first newsletter from her administration. It came on thick ivory cardstock, like it was a wedding invitation. Community Reformation Plan, Phase 1. The whole thing reeked of corporate jargon and barely concealed threats. They were raising dues by 60%. No explanation, no justification, just to preserve standards. Then came the violations. I got a notice taped to my front door, folded like a parking ticket. The offense. Non-compliant porch furniture. Apparently my wooden rocking chair and a weathered side table didn't match the HOA-approved beige resin set listed in Appendix C of the Community Guidelines. A $250 fine. 2 days later, another one. Unapproved ornamental display, which in this case meant my daughter's pink tricycle on the front lawn. That one was $300. I wish I were joking. Laura thought it was a mistake. Maybe it's a new assistant. Or an automated system glitch. Nope. We tried to talk to someone. Anyone. The HOA office was suddenly remote only. No listed phone numbers. Emails bounced back. There were monthly meetings now, but attendance was restricted to members in good standing, which meant anyone with unpaid fines was locked out. A Kafkaesque trap. Get fined, get banned, and pay without questioning. Then came the kicker. We received a certified letter marked HOA Confidential. Inside was a formal notice about the new Community Integrity Protocol. It required all residents to submit to the following: a blood panel and toxicology screening, certification of psychological fitness from a licensed mental health provider, declaration of income sources, a statement of political affiliation, and social alignment values. My first thought, this had to be a prank. Some kind of next-door fueled satire. But the letter had HOA letterhead, a real signature from Karen Hughes, stamped with a ridiculous gold foil seal. Laura read the letter 3 times, each time with her mouth open a little wider. She wants our blood, Josh. Literally. I laughed, because what else do you do when you're being asked to submit your body fluids to a suburban dictatorship? But my laugh didn't last long. The next week, our neighbor Jake, retired Army, quiet guy, loves fishing, got hit with a non-cooperation violation. His water was cut off for non-compliance. When I asked what was going on, he looked spooked and just said, "Don't push her." That was enough for me. I sat down with Bethany Powell, our attorney. She was tough, sharp, and didn't waste time. "This isn't just overreach," she said after reading the protocol. "This is intrusion bordering on criminal misconduct. HOA has no right to demand medical or political records. Period." She helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, citing constitutional protections, state housing law, and a few pointed Supreme Court cases for flavor. We sent it certified, with a return receipt requested. 3 days later, I got another envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper typed in bold all caps. Continued non-compliance may result in the loss of residency privileges. Residency privileges, like I was a guest, in my own goddamn house. I looked out my window that night and saw Karen walking her tiny dog past my driveway. She didn't wave, just stared, smiled, and kept walking. The chair on my porch creaked in the wind like it was waiting for someone to flip it over. At first, it was little things. A missing Amazon package, A pizza delivery guy who couldn't find our house. I chalked it up to GPS quirks or another lazy FedEx subcontractor, but then our mail stopped arriving altogether. Laura called the post office. After sitting on hold for 45 minutes, she finally got a bored-sounding clerk who mumbled something about address not recognized. She thought it was a miscommunication until she logged into our USPS account and saw our forwarding address had been mysteriously activated to nowhere. Literally, it just said unknown destination. We canceled it, reactivated it, and figured that was that. Until I tried to update the tags on our car and got flagged at the DMV. The guy behind the glass squinted at his monitor and said, "Huh, your residential address isn't in our system." I stared at him. "What do you mean it's not in your system? I live there. I pay taxes there. I have a deed. Want to see it?" He just shook his head. "All I'm saying is that the parcel ID tied to your address doesn't exist anymore. You can't register a vehicle to a ghost lot." He smiled like he'd just said something funny. I didn't. I walked out of there with a growing weight in my chest. Back home, I pulled up the county's GIS map. Sure enough, our house, our entire lot, was blank. Every parcel on our street was labeled, except ours. Where our home should have been was just a gray void, like someone had taken an eraser to the digital map of the world. The next day, I went down to the county zoning office in person. It took some teeth pulling to get past the front desk, but eventually I got a short meeting with a mid-level bureaucrat named Marcia, who looked perpetually 2 hours past her lunch break. When I showed her our address, she frowned, typed it in, then squinted at the screen. That lot was flagged for removal 3 weeks ago. Flagged by who? She hesitated. HOA initiated a request citing historical zoning discrepancies. It was reviewed and passed through an expedited administrative panel, said the structure was built in violation of 1983 residential development protocols. Something about erroneous grandfathering. My blood turned to battery acid. That's absurd. This house was built in 2009 with permits, and I've got a notarized title from last year. She shrugged. You'll need to speak to legal. But technically, right now, this address doesn't exist in any active zoning database. I left the building dizzy with disbelief. I sat in my truck for 10 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. I kept thinking I was going to wake up, maybe realize this was some twisted suburban fever dream. But no. My home, the roof over my family's head, was being erased with the push of a button by people who didn't even have the decency to knock on my damn door. Later that week, there was a community meeting. A nice euphemism for the regular HOA assembly where Karen got to play dictator in a pantsuit. I showed up, of course. I wasn't invited, still labeled non-compliant, but I stood in the back of the room like an unholy ghost. The room quieted as soon as I walked in. Karen stood behind a podium in the front, flanked by her new board, a crew of pasty sycophants who looked like they hadn't had a real job in a decade. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance. We'd like to address the municipal zoning irregularities affecting certain lots, she began, her voice honeyed and awful. Due to historical mapping errors, a small number of structures have been identified as extra-jurisdictional. These anomalies, while unfortunate, must be corrected in accordance with community bylaws and regional compliance. Someone in the crowd raised a hand. What exactly does that mean? Karen smiled. It means a few properties were erroneously included in this development due to oversights during early zoning assessments. HOA, in coordination with municipal authorities, is working to correct the mistake. I raised my voice from the back. Are you talking about my house, Karen? A few heads turned. Karen finally looked at me. I'm referring to properties that were built on land not technically authorized for residential use within this community. Those owners should have never been issued deeds in the first place. I stepped forward. Are you seriously suggesting my deed is invalid? I'm suggesting, she said slowly, that there are certain privileges tied to residency, and if a home was built without legitimate jurisdiction, it cannot claim those privileges. Privileged, like access to utilities, mail, legal recognition, and maybe eventually the right to stay on the property at all. I looked around the room. Some people looked confused. A few seemed uncomfortable, but not one person spoke up. On my way out, I noticed new flyers taped to the neighborhood bulletin boards. Neighborhood Realignment Plan. Phase 1, Parcel Reclassification Initiative, sponsored by Horizon Revitalization Development. I tore one off the board and took it home. The fine print made my stomach twist. Ineligible parcels will be assessed for community reintegration or alternative allocation. Residents may be offered relocation compensation pending board approval. I called James that night, my neighbor down the street. Former cop, sharp guy. I asked if he'd heard anything. He sighed. They flagged my lot too, told me I should consider a more sustainable living arrangement. Whatever the hell that means. We both sat silent for a moment. Then I said what neither of us wanted to admit. This isn't about zoning, is it? Nope, James said. It's a land grab. I didn't sleep much after that HOA meeting. Every creak of the house felt louder, more fragile, like the floorboards themselves were bracing for eviction. I spent most of the night at the kitchen table going over the property documents again. Deed, mortgage, plat map, permit history. All perfectly legal. All worthless now, apparently, if someone could just erase us from the map with a few mouse clicks. Bethany met me at her office the next morning. She looked grim. Not the "you're screwed" kind of grim, more like the "this is going to be ugly and I live for this kind of fight" grim. She wore that smile lawyers get when something isn't just legally actionable, it's practically gift-wrapped. I'm submitting a formal record request to the county GIS and zoning office, she said, already typing. I want every parcel modification request filed by HOA leadership over the past 12 months. If they're hiding something, it'll show up in the paperwork trail, and if it doesn't, that's even worse. 2 days later, she called me with results. You're going to want to sit down for this. They had found it. A document labeled Administrative Correction Parcel 14B filed under an expedited GIS adjustment clause. It was signed by someone listed as Eric L. Monroe, Interim Cartographic Technician. The title alone sounded made up. So did the reason for deletion. Irregular lot formation, legacy exclusion from approved site plan. Eric Monroe had been employed, technically, for 3 weeks. He had no credentials, no GIS certification, and had disappeared from the system the day after submitting the adjustment. The address listed on his application was fake. The phone number went to a burner. The signature didn't match any county personnel records. In other words, the guy never existed. This isn't incompetence, Bethany said. It's coordinated fraud. At the same time, HOA doubled down. We got another notice taped to the door. This time, it wasn't about furniture or toys or flags. It was a service suspension. Water, garbage pickup, and HOA-sponsored landscaping were being temporarily discontinued due to administrative uncertainty regarding residency status. The same day, the trash company skipped our bin entirely, and a landscaping crew tore up our front flower bed by mistake. Quote, believing the lot was unoccupied. Laura nearly lost it. I called the city and filed an emergency complaint, but they just bounced me from one extension to another. Eventually, someone told me, you need to work this out with your HOA, like I hadn't been trying. Then James showed up on my porch with a manila envelope in his hand and a grim expression on his face. You need to see this. Inside were 12 names, homeowners, all with properties marked for parcel realignment by the HOA. All of them had received some version of what we'd gotten: suspension of services, invalid mail status, zoning confusion. You know what's weird, James said. Most of them are older, retired, live alone, or out of town a lot. Low visibility. Easy targets. I looked at the list. It read like a preemptive eviction notice. That night, I called my cousin Owen, works in IT security. I asked if he could help me secure our house. We installed motion sensors, extra cameras, and backup storage for all footage. Paranoia doesn't mean they're not out to get you, because someone was. Next morning, I drove to the county zoning office again, this time armed with Bethany's documents and an even sharper sense of dread. I asked for the supervisor. After a long wait, a woman named Denise met me in a back office, clearly annoyed but curious. I laid out everything: the fake employee, the administrative correction, the sudden disappearance of my parcel ID. She stared at the screen. Then she blinked. You're not going to believe this, she said. I already didn't. There are 3 other administrative correction filings under the same name, all within a 2-week window, all on lots inside your HOA. One of them, a home that burned down 2 months ago. Fire ruled accidental, no cause ever found. Her voice trailed off. I leaned forward. You think this is part of a bigger pattern? I think, she said slowly, you should talk to someone higher up, like state level. Before I left, I asked for copies. She hesitated, then nodded and hit print. Driving home, I noticed new signs going up around the neighborhood. Sleek, modern-looking real estate ads. Future site of Horizon Urban Living, private community, private standards, private life. That name again, Horizon. It sounded like a cult disguised as a brand. Later that day, I saw a glossy pamphlet slipped under our door. It looked like a high-end development brochure. Clean lines, architectural renderings, marketing fluff. Inside, on page 2, was a proposed site plan overlay. Our house was gone. Replaced by Community Garden and Resource Pavilion, they were literally landscaping us out of existence. I wasn't sleeping much anymore. Nights blurred into early mornings, and mornings felt like a dress rehearsal for a war nobody else believed was happening. The world outside our windows stayed quiet. Sprinklers ticking on time, kids biking past, someone walking their dog with earbuds in. But for us, it felt like living under siege. We were still physically in our house, but every legal thread tethering us to that ground was unraveling. Bethany moved fast. She filed for a temporary restraining order against the HOA, naming the board as defendants and citing property rights interference, malicious administrative conduct, and unauthorized utility disruption. She wrapped it all in enough legal language to choke a state senator. 3 days later, we got the TRO. It wasn't a silver bullet, but it put the brakes on any further HOA action against our property. No more sudden landscaping errors. No more service suspensions. And legally, they couldn't communicate with us directly without routing it through Bethany. It was a small victory. The kind you don't celebrate. You just breathe a little slower for a day. While she worked the civil front, I hit back with the truth. I called in a favor from an old high school buddy, Andrew Sharp, a local journalist with the Arizona Gazette. We met at a diner just off Route 17. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. "Give me the story," he said. "No fluff, just fire." I laid it out from the top. The bogus zoning correction, the non-existent employee, the service cuts, the strange flyers, Horizon, Karen's little dystopia wrapped in community watch colors. I showed him documents, photos, the pamphlet with the Community Garden and Resource Pavilion plastered over where my home still stood. He listened, nodded, took notes the old-fashioned way with a pencil and legal pad. When I was done, he just said, "This won't be buried." A week later, it hit the front page, wiped from the map. Arizona HOA accused of erasing homes with bureaucratic shell game. There was a photo of me in front of our house, arms crossed, a tape. Notice from the HOA still stuck to our front door. The article was brutal. It listed the names of the 12 flagged homeowners. James was quoted calling the HOA's actions a legalized land heist. It included excerpts from the GIS correction documents and an unflattering close-up of Karen from a recent HOA newsletter. The story spread faster than I expected. Local radio stations started mentioning it. A news crew came by our house. I gave them a statement from the porch, made sure to include the line, "They want our land, but they can't have our spine." Yeah, a little dramatic, but it felt good. That same week, Bethany filed an official complaint with the Arizona State Civil Rights Division and also reached out to the regional HUD office. Not long after, we got a knock on the door from a sharply dressed man in a federal windbreaker. He introduced himself as Special Investigator Nolan, part of HUD's Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity. "We're taking a close look," he said, scanning the front of our house like it was a crime scene. "Don't talk to HOA. If they approach you, call this number." He handed me a card. Things were moving fast now, which naturally meant HOA fired back. They started leafleting the neighborhood with propaganda. Full-color flyers with stock images of smiling families and slogans like "Protect our peace" and "Don't let one family endanger us all." They accused me, by name, of slander, incitement, and anti-community behavior. Some of the phrasing sounded downright Soviet. James called me the night he got one. "They put this crap in my mailbox," he said. "You see the fine print? They're threatening to evaluate residential eligibility for anyone who associates with you." I exhaled through clenched teeth. Guilt by association. Classic. And then came the van. One morning, I was pulling weeds in the side yard just to do something that felt normal when I noticed a gray Dodge Sprinter parked 2 houses down. No plates, tinted windows. A man in the driver's seat with a clipboard. He was pointing at our house, talking to someone on the phone. I walked up to him. "Help you with something?" He looked startled, like I'd caught him watching a crime he was supposed to commit later. "Just here, doing a site evaluation," he mumbled. "For who?" He didn't answer, just started the engine and pulled away. But I caught the logo on the door before he did. Subtle, classy. Horizon Urban Development. I called Bethany immediately. "Now we're in RICO territory," she said. "This isn't just HOA misconduct. It's corporate conspiracy. Get your footage saved. Don't delete anything." The next day, I went out to get the paper and found Karen standing on the sidewalk across from our house. Same smug little rat dog on a leash. She smiled at me like she was offering a coupon for free coffee. "Lovely morning," she said. "Leave," I told her. She didn't move. "I hope you're prepared for the consequences of your actions," she said. "I am," I replied. "Are you?" That wiped the smile right off her face. I knew things were bad when Bethany stopped calling and just started showing up in person. That morning, she knocked like a cop. No pleasantries, just walked in, laptop under her arm, and said, "They got sloppy." She sat up at our kitchen table and pulled up a file directory she'd subpoenaed from the county planning archives. Most of it looked like bureaucratic filler, emails, scanned memos, zoning memos, but then she clicked into a folder labeled Pilot Project 9X, Horizon Integration. What we found made my skin crawl. The HOA, under Karen's leadership, had applied to be part of a private urban land reconfiguration pilot run under the radar by a private equity firm called Horizon Urban Development. The program's purpose was to identify and optimize underutilized residential parcels in suburban zones. Translation: steal homes, scrub records, resell the land as redevelopment. The pitch was slick. By reclassifying outdated, miszoned, or non-compliant parcels, communities may unlock untapped value. In return, Horizon paid HOA boards a percentage of each reabsorbed property's post-sale value. Bethany scrolled to an attached payment ledger. There it was. Wire transfers to an account listed under K. Hughes Legal Trust. Tens of thousands of dollars. A steady drip of money, labeled innocuously as Community Initiative Bonus, Sustainability Partnership Grant, and, most brazenly, Wellness Zone Facilitation. I stared at the screen, trying to breathe. "This isn't just fraud," I said. "It's racketeering." Bethany nodded. "I've already contacted the U.S. Attorney's Office." It got darker. Attached was a list of target parcels from Phase 1, ours, James's, 9 others. Not just selected for their zoning vulnerability, but for low risk of resistance, elderly residents, non-English speakers, people with medical conditions. A homeowner listed as terminally ill was flagged as likely to vacate. They'd profiled people, calculated human resistance the way you'd budget for paint. Later that afternoon, James came over. He looked rattled, which was saying something for a guy who used to break up bar fights for a living. He dropped a photo envelope on the table. "Took these yesterday. HOA board meeting at Karen's house." "Recognize the guy?" I flipped through the pictures, grainy shots from a distance. A man in a suit talking with Karen in her driveway. His face was familiar, but I couldn't place it until Bethany pulled up an old press photo. Grant Holbrook, Deputy Director of Zoning Compliance for the city. "You're telling me a city official was at a private HOA meeting?" I asked. "Not just attending," James said. "I saw him leave with a folder labeled Phase 2. Bethany exhaled sharply. "That's our mole." We did some digging. Turns out Holbrook's name appeared on several of the GIS corrections, rubber stamping changes initiated by Monroe, the fake cartographer. We also found public records of him receiving real estate consulting payments through a shell LLC, money funneled through a dummy firm tied to, you guessed it, Horizon. This wasn't a rogue HOA. This was organized theft, assisted by corrupt public officials. Bethany compiled everything: payment trails, fake employees, illicit meetings, targeting vulnerable homeowners. She sent the entire dossier to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit and CC'd the Arizona Attorney General. 3 days later, agents showed up at City Hall. Karen's public tone shifted almost overnight. The HOA issued a statement saying they were voluntarily suspending all community development initiatives pending audit. They blamed procedural irregularities, claimed they were reviewing partnerships, and insisted their intent was always to serve the community. Bullshit, but strategic bullshit. Meanwhile, our mailbox was hit with one last piece of HOA venom, a letter marked Final Warning, Notice of Relocation. Inside was a bland corporate message stating that our house was scheduled for deactivation under Section 9F of the community. zoning integrity plan, and that we should vacate voluntarily to facilitate community reinvestment. No court order, no eviction, just a piece of paper trying to make us disappear. I called Bethany. She didn't even blink. We'll file for emergency declaratory relief. You're not going anywhere. But it was clear now. They weren't backing down. They were just regrouping. That night, I stepped out onto the porch with a beer and watched the sunset blaze over the stucco roofs. James sat on the steps beside me. "I think this is bigger than even we thought," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "But I've got more fight left than they do paperwork." I thought the final warning letter would be their last gasp, a desperate, paper-thin attempt to scare us into packing up and disappearing quietly. But I was wrong. Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That week started with a bang. Literally. It was just after midnight. Laura and I were jolted awake by a crash that shook the windows. I ran outside barefoot, expecting a car accident. What I found was worse. Someone had hurled a cinder block through the rear window of my truck. Glass covered the driveway. On the shattered back seat sat the block, spray painted in red. Unfit. James came running out of his house seconds later, gun in hand, eyes scanning the dark like he was back on patrol in Kandahar. "You see anything?" I shook my head, breathing hard. "Just this." He picked up the block with gloved hands and stared at it like it was a dead animal. "They're escalating." Next day, I installed floodlights around the house and added another layer to our security system. I filed a police report, though the responding officer seemed about as interested as a DMV clerk during lunch hour. When I showed him the spray paint, he just said, "Probably a local kid. You know, tensions with the HOA and all." Yeah, a local kid with detailed knowledge of our legal battle and access to construction materials. Bethany was furious. "We're filing for protection. This isn't just harassment. It's intimidation connected to an active federal investigation." Later that day, she got a call from a contact in the U.S. Attorney's Office. "They're taking it seriously now," she told me. FBI has started pulling digital communications from HOA servers. Karen's personal email, too. The dam started to crack. A week later, a whistleblower came forward. Of all people, the HOA's former bookkeeper, a quiet woman named Denise who had resigned 4 months earlier for personal reasons. Andrew, the journalist, put me in touch with her after she reached out off record. We met at a diner on the edge of town. She wore oversized sunglasses and looked like she hadn't slept since Easter. They kept 2 sets of records, she whispered over lukewarm coffee, one for members and one for Horizon. She handed me a flash drive. "You didn't get this from me." Bethany went through the contents that night. Internal memos, scanned receipts, private board emails, including direct messages between Karen and Holbrook discussing liquidation timelines and resistance risk. In one email, Karen wrote, "Craven's got noise, but no leverage. Once we dissolve the parcel legally, everything else is PR." Bethany smiled like a wolf. "We have leverage now." 2 days later, the Arizona Gazette ran another front-page bombshell. HOA bookkeeper leaks evidence of bribes, 2-tier records, targeted intimidation. Karen tried to issue a rebuttal, claimed the bookkeeper was disgruntled and that the documents were taken out of context. But nobody was buying it anymore. By then, state legislators were calling for hearings, and HUD's legal counsel had requested all HOA board financials going back 5 years. Then came the arrests. First was Holbrook, cuffed in his driveway, boxed up by 2 federal agents while his neighbors filmed from across the street. He was charged with conspiracy fraud and public corruption. 3 days later, agents raided the HOA office, a sterile little beige building that looked more like a failed dentist clinic than the nerve center of a criminal conspiracy. They walked out with boxes, hard drives, laptops. Karen hadn't been arrested yet, but the writing was on the wall. She tried to project control, smiling at neighborhood meetings, parading her dog past our house like she still owned the place. But her voice was tight, and her eyes scanned every shadow. And then, the big reveal. A HUD uncovered a private document signed by Karen and Horizon executives labeled Land Yield Optimization Agreement. In it, Karen authorized the sale of any parcel deemed non-conforming in exchange for a 10% bonus on resale. Funds to be redirected through third-party community foundations. One of those foundations, KH Civic Renewal Trust, a shell nonprofit she created to launder the kickbacks. The moment that document became public, the case was no longer local. It went federal. Bethany filed a civil RICO action against Karen, Horizon, and the HOA as a whole. By then, 5 more homeowners had joined us as plaintiffs. We weren't just defending our homes anymore. We were coming for everything they built on fraud. Karen tried one last stunt. She submitted a motion to the HOA board to expel my family from the community pending ongoing litigation, claimed we were a security concern and that our presence created anxiety among residents. The board, to their minor credit, rejected it. 3 of them had already resigned. I saw Karen the next day at the community mailbox. She didn't look at me. Her hands trembled as she opened her slot. "Still think I've got no leverage?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She just walked away. The courtroom was colder than it had any right to be. Industrial carpet, fluorescent lights that made everyone look a little sick. Karen sat across the aisle, flanked by her attorneys, 3 of them, all in charcoal suits, none with a trace of soul behind their eyes. She didn't look at me, not once, not even when they read her name aloud during a roll call. It was the preliminary hearing for the federal case: conspiracy, wire fraud, racketeering, obstruction, and abuse of zoning authority under color of office. I lost track of how many counts. 20? 22. The judge read through them like he was ordering lunch. Beside me, Bethany looked composed as ever, but I could feel the tension in her jaw. She'd poured herself into this, and it showed. Her opening brief was so tight, so devastating, that Karen's lead attorney barely responded, just asked for a continuance and kept checking his watch like he knew this ship was already taking water. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. A local news van had been parked there since 6 a.m. Protesters showed up too. Residents from our neighborhood, people from other HOA-run communities who recognized the wolf in sheep's clothing. Some held signs: HOAs, legalized extortion, stop Horizon now, we are not parcels. Karen had become a symbol, a cautionary tale dressed in beige linen. Back home, our property was no longer under threat, at least not on paper. The restraining order had been upgraded to a permanent injunction, and the court had reinstated our parcel in all official databases. My DMV records, taxes, utilities, everything was back. But it didn't feel like a win yet. Not with her still walking free, still trying to manipulate the system from the inside. Bethany had uncovered more. Using discovery rights granted through the civil RICO action, she gained access to internal HOA communications stretching back 2 years. The archive included meeting transcripts, financial audits, and most damning, a voice memo. It was Karen, rambling into her phone, presumably during a drive. "They don't understand what we're doing. People like Craven are just noise. But once Horizon finishes Phase 2, the community won't remember these setbacks. We'll be model partners for redevelopment grants. The state loves that crap. We're just ahead of the curve." That audio made its way into the federal evidence pool, along with the fake zoning maps, the shell corporations, the signatures from the dead employee, the checks to Holbrook, and those handwritten notes where Karen literally described certain homeowners as dead weight. The federal prosecutor didn't need more, but Bethany wanted it airtight. She flew in the original cartographic technician who'd been working the county GIS system before Monroe mysteriously replaced him. He testified under oath that he had been pushed out without warning, his credentials used to rubber stamp the fraudulent changes before he could contest them. Then came Denise, the bookkeeper. Her voice shook, but she delivered. Line by line, she walked through how Karen laundered the money through the fake trust. Horizon's role was undeniable. The payouts, the planning documents, the real estate firm Urban Echo that handled pre-sale appraisals, also run by Karen's brother under a different name. It wasn't a scheme. It was an empire, and it was collapsing. 3 days into testimony, Horizon's lawyers offered a deal: full cooperation in exchange for partial immunity for 2 execs. They turned over everything: internal memos, emails, digital recordings, even calendar invites that tied Karen directly to Horizon's development board. The moment the jury heard kickback payments scheduled around parcel removals, you could feel the air shift. Karen tried to settle. Her lawyers proposed a fine and a public apology in exchange for a suspended sentence. The judge didn't even blink. Trial proceeds. By then, 5 additional homeowners had joined the civil suit, and the state announced a full audit of all HOAs in Maricopa County. Karen had officially become radioactive. Then the hammer dropped. The judge allowed Bethany to submit the integrity protocol documents into evidence, the ones where Karen demanded blood tests, psychiatric evaluations, and political disclosures. The courtroom fell dead silent as those were read aloud. One juror actually mouthed, "Jesus Christ." Karen's defense collapsed the next day. Her lead attorney withdrew. The court froze her assets. Her KH Civic Renewal Trust was seized and placed under federal control. The trial was entering final phase. Sentencing loomed, but by then, everyone knew where it was heading. I remember walking out of the courthouse with Laura. The sun was blinding. It felt earned. "She's going down," I said. Laura nodded. "And she's taking a few with her." They sentenced Karen to 22 years in federal prison. The judge delivered the decision without theatrics, just calm, precise words that landed like stone slabs on concrete. She stood as it was read, arms crossed, jaw clenched, as if sheer defiance could somehow shield her from consequence. But even her high-dollar lawyers couldn't stop what came next. 5 counts of wire fraud, 3 of racketeering, conspiracy to defraud the federal government, obstruction of justice, violations of the HOA Act and Fair Housing Act. The courtroom was still as stone. When the judge mentioned the targeting of elderly and disabled residents for removal, Karen finally blinked. When he added that her actions amounted to institutional abuse under color of leadership, she looked down. But she never said a word. Not one apology. Not a hint of regret. She left in cuffs, escorted by 2 U.S. Marshals, her designer heels clicking against the tile like a metronome counting down the last seconds of her life as a free woman. But she wasn't the only one. Grant Holbrook took a deal, 5 years in minimum security and permanent disqualification from public office. 2 Horizon executives were charged under a corporate RICO clause, and though they avoided prison with cooperation, they paid over $6 million in restitution across 24 victims. And the HOA? Gone. Dissolved by court order. All of Karen's resolutions and fines were voided. Every last fraudulent zoning correction was overturned. The HOA office, once their little command bunker, was gutted by the county. The building's deed was transferred, ironically, to a local legal aid nonprofit funded in part by the class action settlement. Bethany stood beside me at the ribbon cutting 2 months later. "I think this is what justice looks like," she said. I nodded, holding the scissors a little too tight. "It's not as clean as I imagined, but yeah, it's close. We used part of our awarded damages, just under $250,000, to renovate our home and cover the legal bills of 3 neighbors who'd been dragged into the same fight. The rest? We built something better. At the edge of our street, where the HOA sign used to stand, we planted a small copper plaque into a stone pedestal. I helped James anchor it in place one weekend, both of us working in silence. When we finished, we stood back and read it together. Here lives a family that refused to be erased. Underneath, smaller text, dedicated to all who defend what's theirs when the law forgets to. Word spread. The area that once hosted Karen's model community became something very different. Free, scrappy, honest. The HOA horror stories drew attention statewide, leading to new legislation tightening oversight on associations. The Craven case, they called it. I didn't ask for that label, but I'll take it. Beats the guy with the fake parcel. People still stop by sometimes. They ask about the sign. Some are neighbors. Some are from across the country. One guy drove in from Nevada, said his HOA tried to do the same thing. "You really sued them into oblivion?" he asked. "Didn't have a choice," I said. "They tried to delete my life with a filing error." The best part? That legal center where the HOA office used to be. It's pro bono. Every Thursday, Bethany and her team volunteer hours for any homeowner facing abuse or fraud. The sign over the door reads, "Not one more parcel." I stood there last week, watching an older couple walk in, a man clutching a folder of wrinkled documents and a face full of quiet hope. And for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Real peace. Because when they came for us, they thought we'd crumble. But we didn't. We fought. And we won.